At my retirement party, my brother stood up and said, "Since you won't need your savings, you should give them to me." Everyone laughed until he pulled out a fake will. The lawyer smiled and said, "Actually, let me show you the real one." My brother's smug face instantly turned to panic. I never thought my retirement party would turn into a battlefield, but that's exactly what happened. The moment my younger brother stood up and said, "Since you won't need your savings, you should give them to me," everyone laughed. It was an awkward, uncomfortable laugh, but a laugh nonetheless. Then, he pulled out a will. I remember how smug he looked, standing there with this fake document in his hands, acting like he was the smartest person in the room. He wasn't. Because my lawyer, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, just smiled and said, "Actually, let me show you the real one." And just like that, my brother's confidence shattered. Before that night, I should have seen it coming. My brother, Ethan, was always a taker. The kind of person who thought the world owed him something just for existing. He'd grown up expecting everything to be handed to him, while I had to work for every single thing I had. We were raised by the same parents, under the same roof, but somehow, we turned out completely different. I spent 40 years working as a financial analyst. Long hours, constant stress, but I stuck it out because I wanted to retire comfortably. I was careful with my money, made smart investments, and built a life that would allow me to enjoy my later years without worry. Ethan, on the other hand, burned through every cent he ever made. He hopped from job to job, always quitting the moment things got too hard. He had credit card debt up to his eyeballs, multiple failed businesses, and the financial planning skills of a raccoon digging through a dumpster. Still, I never thought he'd try to pull something this insane. The party that turned into a war zone, my retirement party, was supposed to be a celebration. A chance to enjoy good food, good company, and the sweet feeling of knowing I'd finally made it to the finish line. It was held at a nice restaurant, with about 50 close friends, old colleagues, and family members. The night was going well, until Ethan stood up. I should have known he wasn't just going to congratulate me and sit back down. That's not how he operates. Instead, he cleared his throat, raised his glass, and loudly announced, "Now that you're retired, you don't really need all that money sitting in your accounts." The room went silent. People shifted in their seats. Some chuckled awkwardly, thinking he was joking. I wasn't laughing. Then, Ethan pulled out a will. A document, printed on official-looking paper, with my forged signature at the bottom. "I talked to some lawyers," he continued. "And since I'm family and you don't have kids, it just makes sense for you to pass your estate down to me." I was stunned. He was dead serious. I wasn't the only one shocked. Some of my friends muttered to each other, my former boss looked outright disgusted, and my lawyer, who had been invited as a guest, just sat back with this amused little smirk, like he was waiting for the perfect moment to step in. Then Ethan said the words that sent a chill down my spine. I even had the paperwork drafted already. "If you just sign this tonight, we can get everything squared away. No stress for you." That's when my lawyer finally spoke up. "Actually," he said, leaning forward with a calm smile, "why don't I show you the real will?" And that's when everything blew up. Ethan's face dropped. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. The color drained from his cheeks. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense man named Mr. Calloway, pulled out another document from his briefcase. A real, legally binding will that I had put together years ago, one that left not a single penny to Ethan. "I've had this on file for years," Mr. Calloway said, his voice cool and professional. "And just in case you were wondering, yes, it is completely legitimate." Silence. Dead silence. Ethan looked like someone had just hit him over the head with a sledgehammer. He tried to laugh it off, muttering something about a misunderstanding, but no one was buying it. Then, my lawyer turned to me and said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "You might also be interested to know that forging a will is a felony." Ethan's eyes went huge. I could see the panic creeping in. The realization that he had not only failed miserably, but that he might have just landed himself in serious legal trouble. People started whispering. A few guests had already pulled out their phones, probably looking up exactly how illegal this kind of stunt was. Ethan swallowed hard. I was just joking, man. No one believed him. And that was just the beginning. The restaurant was dead silent. Ethan stood there, gripping his fake will like it was a lifeline. His face had gone pale, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for someone to save him. But no one was on his side. Not our relatives. Not my friends. Not even his own wife. My lawyer, Mr. Calloway, sat back in his chair, looking completely at ease, like he had all the time in the world to watch Ethan's world crumble. Then, Ethan did what he always does when he gets caught. He lied. "Come on, man. It was just a joke." He forced out a laugh, waving the fake will in the air. "I just thought it'd be funny to mess with you a little." No one laughed. "You had a document forged," Mr. Calloway said, his voice calm but firm. "That's not a joke. That's a serious crime." Ethan swallowed hard. His hands shook. I could see the wheels in his head turning, trying to find a way out. And then, right when I thought he'd finally shut up, he doubled down. You know what? His voice suddenly turned angry, his fake confidence creeping back. You don't even deserve that money. You never had kids, you don't have a wife, you're just some old guy hoarding cash for no reason. Murmurs spread through the room. People exchanged looks of disbelief. I mean, look at you. Ethan kept going, his voice rising. You worked all your life for what? To sit alone in some house with a bunch of money you'll never even use? Meanwhile, I have a family. I have kids who need a future. And you're telling me you'd rather let all that money rot than help your own blood. That was it. That was the moment I realized Ethan wasn't just desperate, he truly believed he deserved my money. And that was also the moment I decided to ruin him. The moment Ethan knew he was screwed, I slowly stood up, took a deep breath, and then looked Ethan dead in the eyes. You're right about one thing, I said, my voice steady. I worked my whole life to build something for myself. I planned, I sacrificed, and I made smart choices. And you? You spent your life making excuses. Ethan clenched his jaw. I cut him off. You don't deserve a single cent from me. And just so we're clear, you never will. I turned to Mr. Calloway. Can we do something about this little stunt he just pulled? Mr. Calloway's eyes glinted. Actually, we can. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out his phone. Forgery of legal documents is a serious crime. I'd be happy to make a few calls. Ethan panicked. His confidence crumbled. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Then he ran. I kid you not, he grabbed his fake will, shoved it under his jacket, and bolted out of the restaurant. Silence. Then, someone laughed. Just one person at first. Then another. And then, the entire room erupted into laughter. Ethan had just publicly humiliated himself in front of 50 people, including lawyers, business owners, and judges. But I wasn't done with him yet. Unraveling the lies the next morning, I got a call from my sister-in-law, Maggie, Ethan's wife. She sounded exhausted. I need to see you, she said. It's about Ethan. We met up at a coffee shop later that day. She looked terrible, dark circles under her eyes, her hands wrapped around her cup like it was the only thing keeping her together. I had no idea what he was planning, she said the moment she sat down. He told me he was going to ask you for a loan. That's it. I didn't believe her at first, but then she pulled out her phone and showed me text messages from Ethan. And that's when I realized. This wasn't just some last-minute, impulsive scheme. Ethan had been planning to steal from me for months. Maggie scrolled through message after message. There were texts to a shady lawyer, asking about how to contest a will. There were messages to friends, bragging about how he was going to inherit my estate soon. And then, there was the worst one of all. A message to a real estate agent. I'll have the money in a few weeks. Just hold the property for me. My blood ran cold. Ethan had already picked out a house he planned to buy with my money. He hadn't just hoped I'd sign over my assets. He had banked on it. He was already spending money that wasn't his. I looked at Maggie. Did you know about this? Tears welled up in her eyes. I swear I didn't. But, she hesitated. But what? She took a deep breath. He's in really deep trouble. It's not just credit card debt. He borrowed money from people you don't want to owe. I leaned forward. How bad are we talking? Maggie lowered her voice. There's a guy who's been calling nonstop. Ethan owes him over 100 grand. I sat back. 100 grand. No wonder Ethan had been so desperate. He wasn't just trying to take my money because he felt entitled. He needed it to stay afloat. I exhaled slowly. Maggie, listen to me. I know he's your husband, but you need to protect yourself. Because after what he just pulled, I'm going after him. Her hands trembled. What are you going to do? I didn't have an answer just yet. But one thing was for sure, Ethan had made the biggest mistake of his life. And now, I was going to make sure he paid for it. Maggie looked miserable. She kept rubbing her hands together, avoiding my eyes. I don't know what to do, she whispered. He lied to me about everything. And now I don't even know if we can keep our house. I sat back, taking it all in. Ethan owed over 100 grand to some very dangerous people, had tried to forge my will to bail himself out, and was already spending money he didn't have. And now, his own wife was on the verge of leaving him. Good. But I wasn't done with him yet. The other secret Ethan didn't want me to know. I told Maggie I'd think of something and left the coffee shop, but I wasn't going home just yet. There was still one loose end I needed to tie up, Ethan's job. See, my brother had spent most of his life bouncing between gigs, but for the last 3 years, he'd somehow managed to land a stable job at a mid-sized insurance company. It was the only reason he hadn't completely collapsed financially. And guess how he got that job? By using me as a reference. I had found out after the fact that Ethan had put my name down as a character reference, listing me as his former business partner. Which was a joke, because we had never worked together a day in our lives. But now I had a reason to check in on him. So, I made a little phone call. One call, and his whole career was in jeopardy. I called the HR department of Ethan's company and introduced myself. Hi, my name is my name. I believe my brother, Ethan, used me as a reference when he applied here. The woman on the other end sounded polite, but confused. Oh, yes, I think I remember seeing your name on his application. Well, I said, keeping my voice casual, I just found out he listed me as his former business partner, and I wanted to clarify something. Silence. Then. Oh! I could almost hear her sitting up straighter. I went on. I've never worked with Ethan. We've never owned a business together. I don't know what he told you, but it wasn't true. The HR rep hesitated. Are you saying he lied on his application? Yes, I said. And while I have you on the phone, I should probably mention that he recently attempted to commit fraud by forging legal documents. That got her attention. She asked me to hold for a moment, and when she came back, her voice had a different tone, more professional, more serious. Thank you for bringing this to our attention, she said. We take these matters very seriously. I'll be passing this along to the appropriate department. I hung up smiling. Ethan was about to have a very bad week. The debt collectors were closing and I didn't have to wait long to hear from him. The next day, he showed up at my house. I had barely opened the door when he pushed past me, slamming it shut behind him. His eyes were wild, his face red. You think this is funny? He hissed. You think ruining my life is some kind of joke? I stayed calm. I have no idea what you're talking about. Cut the crap. He jabbed a finger in my face. I got a call from my boss today. They're launching an internal investigation because of you. I folded my arms. Oh, you mean because you lied on your job application? Yeah, that's kind of a big deal. Ethan gritted his teeth. You didn't have to tell them. I raised an eyebrow. I didn't have to, but I wanted to. For the first time, genuine fear flickered across his face. Look, man, you don't get it. If I lose this job, I'm screwed. I leaned against the wall, pretending to think. Kind of like how you tried to screw me over at my own retirement party. That was different. He threw up his hands. I was desperate. I pushed off the wall, stepping closer. And I don't care. You brought this on yourself, Ethan. I'm just making sure you get exactly what you deserve. He opened his mouth, but before he could say anything else, there was a knock at the door. Not a friendly knock. A loud, aggressive pounding. Ethan's face drained of color. I didn't even have to ask. I already knew who it was. The people he owed money to had finally come knocking. He tried to use me as his getaway plan. Ethan grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. You have to let me hide here, he whispered frantically. Please. I stared at him. The audacity. This man had tried to steal my savings, had insulted me in front of my friends, and had just screamed at me for exposing his lies, and now, he wanted me to bail him out? I didn't move. I think you should answer the door. His grip tightened. They'll kill me, man. I'm serious. I believed him. But that wasn't my problem. I shook him off and walked to the door. He tried to grab me again, but I was quicker. Before he could stop me, I swung the door open. And standing outside were two very large, very unfriendly-looking men. The taller one, a guy with a shaved head and arms covered in tattoos, looked me up and down. Then, his gaze landed on Ethan. He smirked. Well, he drawled. Look who finally decided to stop ignoring our calls. Ethan stammered. I was gonna pay you back, I swear. The shorter man, stockier but built like a tank, crossed his arms. You've been saying that for months. Ethan looked at me, desperate. Tell them I'll get the money. I didn't say a word. Because this was the best revenge I could have asked for. One of the men pulled out a piece of paper and shoved it against Ethan's chest. Consider this your final notice, the tattooed guy said. You have 1 week to pay up or we take what's ours. Then, without another word, they turned and left. Ethan was shaking. He turned to me, his face twisted with fury. You're just gonna let them do this to me? I shrugged. Not my problem. And for the first time in his life, Ethan realized I wasn't going to save him. But the worst was yet to come. As satisfying as that moment was, I knew Ethan. He wasn't the type to just accept defeat. He was a cockroach. No matter how many times you thought you got rid of him, he always found a way to crawl back. And sure enough, just a few days later, I found out he was trying to break into my house. The lies keep unraveling after my meeting with Maggie. I had a lot to think about. Ethan hadn't just tried to scam me, he had been planning it for months. He was drowning in debt, owing over $100,000 to people who don't send payment reminders, they send threats. I wasn't naive. I knew that if Ethan was this desperate, he wouldn't stop at just a fake will. So, I did what any responsible person would do. I hired a private investigator. If Ethan had already forged a will, what else had he done? What else was he capable of? A week later, I got my answer. And it was so much worse than I had imagined. The bombshell report: the private investigator, a sharp guy named Rick, met me at his office. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He just slid a folder across the desk. You're going to want to sit down for this. I opened the folder, and my stomach turned. Bank statements. Fraudulent withdrawals. Fake signatures. Ethan had already been stealing from me. Not directly from my personal accounts, but from our late parents' estate. After Mom and Dad passed, they left behind a modest inheritance. Nothing huge, but enough to be split fairly. Since I was the responsible one, I had been named the executor of the estate. But Ethan had somehow gained access to certain accounts and had been siphoning money for over a year. I cross-checked everything, Rick said. Your brother forged documents to move money around. He withdrew over $60,000 in total, making it look like estate fees. I clenched my fists. My own brother had been robbing me and our dead parents behind my back. Rick wasn't finished. There's more. He slid over a list of Ethan's debts. The $100,000 Maggie mentioned? That was just the tip of the iceberg. Ethan owed money to loan sharks, maxed out credit cards, payday lenders, and even an ex-business partner who was threatening to sue. No wonder he was so desperate. Rick leaned back in his chair. Your brother isn't just in financial trouble. He's in legal trouble. And if you press charges for the forgery and the estate fraud, he's looking at some serious consequences. I exhaled slowly. Good. It was time to end this. Setting the trap, Ethan had no idea that I knew everything. So, I decided to let him dig his grave a little deeper. I invited him to lunch, just the two of us. No lawyers. No family. Just two brothers catching up. Ethan showed up looking nervous. His usual fake confidence was gone. He probably thought I was still mad about the wool stunt and was here to smooth things over. We sat down, ordered food, and then I dropped the hammer. I know about the estate money. Ethan froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. I know you've been stealing from Mom and Dad's accounts. I have proof. I pulled out a copy of the financial records and slid them across the table. His face turned red. I don't know what you're talking about. I smiled. You know, Ethan, you're a lot of things. But smart isn't one of them. He lost it. This is your fault, he snapped. If you had just helped me out once in a while, I wouldn't have had to do this. I leaned back, letting him rant. You always hoarded everything. Mom and Dad always treated you like the favorite. You got the better jobs, the better house, the better life. Meanwhile, I was left to struggle. And you expect me to just sit back and watch you enjoy your retirement while I drown? People at the nearby tables were staring. I let the silence stretch for a moment before I spoke. You're right about one thing, Ethan. I did work hard. I did make good choices. And you? You made terrible ones. That's not my fault. That's not Mom and Dad's fault. It's yours. His hands balled into fists. So what, you're just going to let me go to jail? You'd do that to your own brother. I stared at him, deadpan. You forged a will to steal everything I own. You already stole from our parents' estate. Why exactly should I save you? His face went from angry to terrified in seconds. That's when I leaned in and delivered the final blow. Oh, and one more thing. Your wife? Maggie? She knows everything now too. Ethan's mouth fell open. You told her? No. She found out on her own. I smirked. Turns out, she's smarter than you. And as if on cue, Maggie walked into the restaurant. The ultimate betrayal. Ethan's eyes darted to Maggie, then back to me. He knew he was cornered. Maggie walked up to our table, her face cold, unreadable. Then, without a word, she took off her wedding ring and set it on the table. I'm done, she said quietly. The house is already in my name. I've spoken to a lawyer. You'll be hearing from them soon. Ethan lost it. No, you can't do this. Maggie, please. Everything I did for us. She laughed, actually laughed. But there was no humor in it. You did this for yourself. You always do. Ethan turned to me, desperate. Tell her this is a mistake. That she should give me a second chance. I shrugged. She made her choice. Just like you did. He slammed his fists on the table. You'll regret this. Both of you. Maggie looked at him one last time. No, Ethan. The only person who's going to regret anything is you. And with that, she walked away. I stood up, threw some cash on the table, and looked down at my brother one last time. You wanted my money, Ethan? I said. Now, you'll be lucky if you have a place to sleep. And then I left him there alone, broke, and completely destroyed. Aftermath and reflection, Ethan didn't go to jail. Not yet, anyway. I pressed charges for estate fraud, but since it was a first-time offense, he got off with a massive fine and probation. But that fine? It wiped him out completely. Maggie divorced him. She got the house, the car, and full custody of the kids. Ethan tried to fight it in court, but, surprise, he couldn't afford a lawyer. Now? He's living in a rundown apartment, drowning in debt, and working a low-wage job just to scrape by. And me? I'm enjoying my retirement. Because I worked for it. And the biggest lesson I learned? Blood doesn't make family. Loyalty does. And Ethan? He was never family to me. The end.